All right, everybody. Welcome back to Mondays Down South. Cy just let us know that we are being recorded, in case you were wondering. So we're ready to get into it. It's actually Monday here, so we're back on our kind of older schedule. Although I guess none of you realize that because none of those are posted. But it is Monday, so welcome back. We have a guest on the line and should be a good episode. So Zach, Cy, you want to say your hellos and then we'll introduce our guest?
Sure. Yeah. What's up, guys? Thanks for listening again. We have a very special guest with us. He's kind of our NHL SME because nobody else is an NHL SME. But he also we know him from early high school where we would play and compete in competitive plastic ball, right? Isn't that how you framed it, Ev, aka known as wiffle ball, and then also
Ashburn Competitive Plastic Ball League.
That's
ACPBL.
right. That's right. He grew up and played in our backyards pretty much, just like growing up. We always played football on Friday before heading over to the Stonebridge varsity game. We always played wiffle ball back in Evan's backyard, and we just like did that every summer for like 4 or 5 summers until we all unfortunately had to disband and go our own routes. But Garrett, welcome to the podcast, man. I know you're a subscriber as of a couple weeks ago, so thank you for the support and feel free to give a shout out.
I'm gonna jump in here real quick and first of all point out the fact that Zach is dropping in his consulting phrases with the SME, the subject. Where he gets professional up in here. I think he's still hung up on his work calls. Also, I wanted to personally also welcome you, Garrett. This guy has been one of the most entertaining and kindest people in our lives that at least I can speak for all of us in saying that. So we're very excited to have you on. And also welcome back to the viewers and listeners. It's always a pleasure. So it's good to be back. Garrett, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. No, hey, first off, thanks, boys, for having me on here. Definitely very nice to be on here and have some conversations with you guys a little bit about NHL, kind of what's going on in life. But hey, I want to rewind just a little bit. I think the first time I met you, I think we were all in a basement classroom, Miss Carruthers. We had to create a business. If I'm not mistaken, I created the Pig Hut.
The Pig Hut?
And Evan Maroney turned around. He goes, "We gonna be boys." And then I think that's how the whole friendship started off. And then if I'm not mistaken, I think that's when we started fantasy basketball in that class, started fantasy hockey, fantasy football, and fantasy baseball all that year, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely a pleasure to always talk to you boys. It's always nice to get together.
Yeah. Garrett, and I would do.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Zach. No, I was just going to say, I do want to shout out Garrett. I did remember the Pig Hut nickname. I was going to bring that up, so glad you did. But also one of our most avid listeners and subscribers. He was on top of it from the jump. So appreciate that. Shout out to you there. Sai, go ahead.
I also think Garrett kind of set us up perfectly because I was going to throw out the topics here today, and Garrett just kind of hit them both the nail on the head. You're already a great guest that we have here, Garrett. So first and foremost, we're going to start the segment off by talking hockey, which is why we have Garrett on, because I don't know anything about hockey, to be completely honest with you. I need the help. I don't even know if Zach and Evan have really been following it that much. So we're going to let Garrett come in here with his Caps bias and talk about DC hockey for a little while here. And then once we're done with that segment, then Ev, Zach, and I will take over and jump on to fantasy football and give you guys a little preview of what we think for our first round. So teeing it up, let's start with hockey. Actually, before we do hockey, I think we have some big news that we wanted to discuss. Ev, I'll let you throw it out there because I think you brought it up. So I know I'm excited about it. You get the ball rolling.
Good call. I almost forgot. Like I said, it is actually Monday now. So as of about 15 minutes ago, the MLB announced that we are having baseball this season. Unfortunately, earlier today, the MLB Players Association voted to not, they basically didn't agree to the terms that the MLB was putting forward. So Manfred came in and said, all right, we're going to play. They haven't fully announced what the terms are going to be, but it's going to be about a 50-game season, 50 to 60. Universal DH in both leagues, those types of things that we've been hearing about. But it's confirmed we are having baseball this year. I think July 24th is the approximate opening day, which means spring training in early July. So, and a shameless plug, check out last week's video where we talked about our top 5 MLB storylines because it's pretty good stuff. And now it's super relevant. So
this is great. I'm super excited. I'm going to let you guys kind of handle the hockey segment and just be chilling over here because I don't have anything of like worth to contribute, so I'll let you guys take that part, especially because I'm not a big Caps fan. I feel like all you guys are, so I'll let you guys take over from here, and then I'll jump back on plenty for fantasy football. Don't you worry. So you guys go ahead.
Correction, go Canes, actually.
True.
And sorry, Garrett, about Game 7 last year. But
hey, you know what? I brought up Miss Carruthers' class, but I remember, if I'm not mistaken, that day that you turned around and told me that we were going to be boys was the day that you were wearing a Washington Capitals shirt that said OB for Kin on the back, if I'm not mistaken.
Elite shirt.
Elite shirt. If I'm not mistaken, I think you were wearing that. So I think there is a little flip-flop that we had up there.
I was very clear on how I was going to flip-flop, and it was just a coincidence that my last year as a Caps fan, they won the Cup. And then, smooth sailing, and then the Canes beat the Caps in 7 in the first round of the playoffs last year. Life is good.
Now he's wearing a bunch of jerk shirt, whatever that is, man. What does that shirt signify?
From Obi Forkin to bunch of jerks. This was our slogan last year after Don Cherry, some Canadian announcer, made fun of. We did all these crazy post-game celebrations that were just ridiculous and awesome. You should check them out on YouTube. So he went on and whined about how immature and ridiculous our team is for that, and called us a bunch of jerks. So we put it on a bunch of t-shirts, turned it into a slogan, and went from there.
Yeah, that was the post. If I'm not mistaken, you guys were on the Sports Illustrated magazine. Your goalie was out there wearing a pair of boxers, making fun of Baker Mayfield, if I'm not mistaken.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, you guys just had a little bit too much fun last year, and unfortunately that didn't end up well for you guys. But I mean, you guys, like you
ended
said,
up better than you.
Yeah, you did. You know what? I'm not mad at that. So, like Sai said, I am definitely very biased towards the Capitals. I grew up in the South. Actually, I grew up right outside Tennessee. I went to Nashville Predators games as a kid, but when I moved, I didn't really have a true team. So when I moved up north to Northern Virginia, I kind of fell in love with the Capitals. That was when we had the young guns, as you could say, Alexander Semin, Alexander Green, Alexander Ovechkin. I mean, it was kind of a very young team at the time, so it kind of really became a huge Caps fan, and that passion has continued on. But happy to sit here today, talk about NHL playoffs. It's awesome that we are finally starting to see sports come back alive. Could potentially be one of the first sports that do come back if everything works out nicely. I know European soccer is going on right now, but as for the United States, I mean, you got a little bit of UFC. You got some talks from other big sports industries, but hockey's kind of hidden a little bit, but it could be one of the biggest and first to come back. So start things off. Commissioner about a month ago announced that the NHL season was coming back. And the way that he announced it, it was in his basement. It was a pretty cool setup that he had down there. And it was very confusing for people who do not watch sports. So if you guys have any questions as we go, feel free to ask me. But in my honest opinion, I think this is the best setup for playoffs that we have projected so far, or for any other sports. Evan just brought up the news about MLB. I know that's all wishy-washy with how the season's going to look and how the playoffs are going to look. But I think this one is probably, I know everyone says there's going to be an asterisk, but I think this is most honestly the fairest playoffs. So what it looks like, you got the East and the West in NHL. And they play on ice, just so you know, Sai. Got a puck and you got sticks. So what we're doing, you got 12 teams from the East and 12 teams from the West. I know if you take a look at NBA, they really lopsided it. I think they messed up big by saying pretty much the West is the best, and that's how they're doing it. Hockey, I love that they're keeping it fair and consistent. You never know who's going to come out on top. So how it looks, you're going to have 12 teams from each side. Your top 4 teams from each side have automatic first-round byes. But they will still play in that first round, and we'll talk about that in a second. So when you talk about seeds 5 to 12, seeds 5 to 12 will face off against each other in a best-of-5 series. That best-of-5 series determines which 4 teams move on. So there'll be 8 teams. 4 of the teams will move on based on the best-of-5 series. Best-of-5 series. So we talked about those top 4 teams. They technically have a bye. In order for them to still get the hockey game time, since there's no regular season continuing on, they're going to face off against each other in a 1-game matchup. And what that's going to do is that's going to help determine what the top 4 seeds actually are. So when you take a look at the East, for example, you have the Bruins, the Lightning, the Capitals, and the Flyers. Those are your top 4 seeds. So they will play, even if the Capitals or Lightning go 0-3 in the first 3 games, they're still going to be in the playoffs. However, they'll be like a 4 seed. And then whatever team has the best record will still be that 1 seed. And after that, you're pretty much, that's when the playoffs are going to continue. So looking for a timeline, it looks like right now they're in phase 1. Phase 1 players are allowed to come back. They're allowed to skate. No big groups of more than 5 people. They're allowed to work out together. No more than 5. And they're allowed to start like watching tapes and kind of getting back in the area. So right now you're seeing a lot of the hockey players actually come back to their home fields, and they're actually able to start going in. Some states still have regulations on who's able to enter and all that. However, we're starting to see some more fair play. A lot of teams are going down to states that are allowing it. So it is pretty cool to see how we're starting to operate just a little bit more. Starting July 10th, though, they're allowed to start their training camps. So there's going to be 2 weeks of training camps. So 14 days. Teams are allowed to get together. But during that time, they're all going to be tested weekly in order to make sure that no one has COVID, nothing gets spread. So it is pretty cool to see what they're doing. As of right now, over 200 players have been tested already, and only 11 have tested positive. So we'll talk about it in a little bit, though. But then come July 24th, what's going to happen? All the players will fly out to 2 hub cities. So in order to make sure that everyone's kind of local, kind of control what's happening, they're going to play in 2 hub cities. The hub cities are still up for debate. We're trying to figure that out in the NHL. There's rumors that Vegas will be one of them, but now that they're taking a look into it, they're trying to figure out what is the safest. There's been a lot of rumors that came out this week of there was originally 10 cities that were on the list. Now we're down to our final 5, 3 of which are going to be in Canada. So it is pretty crazy to see that this is starting to all come together. The Canadian Health Board is supposedly saying that they feel the safest up there, and they will work with the players during the whole time. So we could potentially have the NHL playoffs held in Canada for the whole duration.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
and I guess.
actually, go ahead,
Zach. No, I was just saying one of the.
Mhm.
Oh, awkward.
That's all right. We'll edit it out. Go ahead. You go ahead.
One of the big issues, I guess, right, Garrett, is with the NHL being so not just like North America, but people coming over from Russia and stuff, is obviously getting people to be able to travel back. Are there talks of like having any issues and not being able to field full rosters with all the travel bans out there and stuff like that? Or is everyone pretty comfortable they're gonna be able to work around that?
everyone's pretty comfortable. If I'm not mistaken, I am a little Caps biased, as you guys know. I've been watching a lot of the Caps social medias. I know 3 of the 5 players have already made it back from over in Europe, so it is cool to see that.
Okay.
I think there's ways around on how they're getting in, so it is nice to see that. And there's a lot of talk of how we're trying to get sports back going. So there's been a lot of workaround and kind of looking the other way in order to make sure that sports are happening. So
Fair enough.
yeah,
I dig that.
so with that being said, it looks like teams are starting to come back into the area. It is nice to see the players start to arrive. I know I was watching a couple of the feeds, and it's so weird just seeing 5 guys out there taking shots, pretty much 1 goalie and 4 people. And it's weird. So one of the biggest things also is they're trying to be like every other league, where they're trying to make it to where the East and the West, they're split up, but they're also in the same kind of location. So then it makes it much easier, much safer. So entire hotels will be rented out for the team. And then also teams will be put to a 50-person maximum for traveling. So you got to think about it. You have about 20 to 25 players on the bench any given night. Yeah. So it only leaves a limited amount of like coaches, additional players, and then trainers in order to come to travel with the team. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get like non-team related officials in order to help with kind of the additional bodies that you're not going to have. So it is pretty cool to see that they're trying to work together, trying to make sure it's as safe as possible. But it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zach, go ahead.
And just touching off that, Garrett, one thing that strikes me as really interesting is the 2 hub cities. I had read something about that too. And it makes sense with Vegas, right? Because you kind of have that Western component. You have a lot of big resort or casino hotels that where you can, you have a lot of space. You have a lot of rooms to start, quarantining the people or the players appropriately. You have enough capacity. You have like separate dining halls. That would certainly make sense as as a specific location. And then also, going back to the East Coast, it would make sense as well to have the kind of incorporate Canada as well, right? Just because there are so many teams in Canada that are playing in the NHL. So it'd be nice to see, maybe a Vegas on the West Coast and maybe a Toronto on the East Coast, a city that, has a lot of, large hotels, large resorts where they can actually fit the capacity of those 12 teams per division, like you had alluded to earlier. One point that strikes me as interesting is I look at Evan's shirt, the bunch of jerks Carolina Hurricanes shirt. And one thing I do know about Carolina is they take their hockey pretty dang seriously. And so I'm not sure, based on those locations, I think you mentioned that only 5 are remaining, right? Or 5 or 10 or something like that. Is Carolina on the list? Because I think that would be pretty interesting to set them up in Carolina if that was a possibility.
I don't think it is. I can't remember what 5 cities. They've been ultra quiet about it. So NHL they announced Columbus actually came out and said that they were taken off the list, unfortunately. So it is crazy to see that like a lot of the information coming out from teams is not coming out from the NHL. It's coming out from the own personal teams. So just a couple minutes ago, we were talking about COVID. It's crazy. The NHL pretty much put out a statement that they will not be reporting any news. They will only be reporting the test amounts and how many people have tested positive. Now it's up to the teams to announce if they have players that have tested positive and what players have tested positive. So, it's all pretty much a keep it down low type of situation, which could change. However, as of right now, yeah, that's how it is.
Crazy times. To cue you up, though, there have been some pretty big name guys test positive, though, right?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, we haven't gotten all the names, but as of right now, some of the tests that are being taken, we don't really know if they're positive at the moment, but as we kind of creep up on that July 10th deadline, they're starting to take procedures in order to make sure that people are quarantined properly. One of the biggest names that actually came out this past week was Austin Matthews. Gentleman was on the NHL 20 cover, on pace in order to have another big year. And unfortunately, that man got tested positive, and that didn't come out from the NHL. That actually came out from the team. But then you have other teams, for example, you have the Boston Bruins. 2 of their players last week tested positive. There's been no word on what players tested positive. So, it's cool to see that they're releasing this information, but it kind of sucks as a fan to know who it is. So, or to not know who it is. It's kind of crazy time.
That makes things interesting, right? Because they, the organization, like you had mentioned, has the power to release the information to their power, right? So as long as they're within compliance, so as long as they're reporting it, they're doing their job, but they don't have to give up that information. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because we're looking at a Boston Bruins team that already has 100 points, the only team in the NHL that has actually surpassed the triple digits. And so, they already know they're in a favorable position, right, in the East and in the NHL for that matter. So why would they give up that information? You go from like David Pastrnak to Bergeron to Brad Marchand to Zdeno Chara. Like, there's so many playmakers on that team that why would it be advantageous from a Boston Bruins standpoint to release that information and almost give, the Washington Capitals maybe a competitive advantage? I think the Caps are 3 or 4 right now, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Garrett, but they could be potentially playing each other, I guess. Well, they would be playing the 2 seed, right? Yeah. So 1 and 4 would play and 2 and 3 would play?
No.
Well, they're not seeded yet.
Yeah, they're not seeded yet. So technically,
that's right.
Technically 1 through 4, they play each other. So Caps will see Bruins once. And then the next time they could possibly see them would be in the pretty much the East Coast Finals. That could be the next time they do see them.
Interesting. Yeah, I understand why, the Boston Bruins would do something like that. They would have to come back in the summer though, right? Like the NHL will have to announce plans to come back at least by August. I don't know if that would even be feasible. I know that you mentioned that they're at phase 1 right now with it, which is a 5-person capacity. Do they have some type of tentative date down?
So July 24th, they will travel to whatever hub cities they are. And then they will be given 7 days to acclimate, go through some more testing, make sure everyone is safe, kind of get the rhythms down. Because, it's not like your old days where you're traveling, you're hopping on a jet at 10 o'clock, you're playing a game, or you're practicing at noon, you're playing a game at 7:05 p.m. You're going there and you're living there. You're moving into a hotel room. You have a roommate full time. Your schedules are going to be a lot different. You're going to have to accommodate. You got 12 teams that are playing in the same city. There's not 12 ice rinks like that, unfortunately. You have all those difficulties.
It's true.
So it's trying to get down to a rhythm. So July 31st is the expected first game.
And with that said, the cool part about all this is it's going to be the same with the NBA. Like you said, there's not that many rinks, so they're going to be playing hockey and they're going to be playing basketball all day long. And you can bet that they're going to try and cover as much of it on TV as they can. So we're going to be able to, watch the NHL, watch the NBA. When baseball comes, I guess baseball they'll probably have a more normal schedule. But with these two sports, all day long action. So.
Oh yeah.
Looking forward to it.
You also got. Yeah, you got to think about it. Your rest days, your practice days, your soft skates, your hard skates. It's definitely going to be an interesting time frame for the players. It's not going to be like any other playoffs. Also you have to take into account back in the day when you had playoffs, you had travel days. Now they don't have travel days anymore. Their travel days are staying in the city. So it's a lot like the MLB, and what the MLB players are complaining about is that there might not be rested days. There might be where you're skating at 75% the whole game.
Yeah.
So Garrett, I just have a quick question for you. First of all, with the amount of incredible detail you provided, do you want to spot a permanent spot on MDS as our go-to hockey reporter wherever you're reporting from? Because this is some incredible stuff right here. But more importantly, I know I mentioned the Bruins. I know we mentioned the Caps. Are there any other teams that pose a very specific challenge to the Caps from maybe winning again? I know they won in 2018. What's preventing them? I guess who's preventing them from winning in 2020?
I was waiting for this question. I seriously think that any team is capable. You got to think you're playing best of fives for the playoffs. That's quick games. You saw the Jerks take the Capitals to Game 7 last year. And if it wasn't for Game 7, the Jerks wouldn't have won. The Caps would have won in 5. If I'm not mistaken, they actually would have won in 4, if I'm not mistaken. We were up 3-1. Right?
It was all home one. All the home teams won until Game 7, so it would have been 5. They would have the Caps would have won. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is pretty crazy to see like this how it's happening. To be honest, I know it's like every other sport. Whoever stays the healthiest is gonna win the Stanley Cup this year. I hate to say it. Like if I was the Capitals, you got to take a look. You have 6 new dads of this year. Ovechkin with being the newest dad, giving birth over this offseason to a second. You got Nick Dowd, Backstrom, just to name a few players who have just had kids. If I was them, I would say, hey, look, team hotel, team bus, and facilities. That's it. I would try to stay as healthy as I can, stay away from people as much as I can. I know no one's prone to it, but at the same time, it's one of those things. 45 days of just hardcore getting in there to get a ring, to get a Stanley Cup. I would take 45 days hardcore, not messing around with anybody in order to stay healthy and get that ring. But some of the big teams that are out there, to name you a few, Blues, they always look nice out there in the West. The Golden Knights actually have the same odds of winning as the Capitals. So if we're talking about odds, just a little betting. I don't know if I've never heard you guys talk about betting on here.
I love it.
But the Bruins have a 13-10 odds. Lightning, if I'm not mistaken, are 8-1. The Caps are 5-1, and I think the Golden Knights are 5-1. So those 4 teams right there, those are your best odds. So it's going to be pretty crazy to see what happens.
I want to jump. Go ahead. Yeah, just because first of all, I want to say, I think we kind of dropped the ball on this earlier, and Garrett kind of set this up perfectly for us. We should have wished all of our fathers and all the fathers listening a very happy Father's Day with all the dads that you just mentioned. And I know we're recording the day after, so I want to get that in there, even though that's not very hockey relevant. And then secondly, I want to ask you if your back is hurting, Garrett, because you just straight carried that segment for us. So
yeah.
I don't think we would have had half of that to provide with that. So, thank you so much, sir. That was one heck of a segment. If you have any last thoughts, please.
Predictions. Give me, what's your actual Caps prediction? Are they going to win or not?
Yeah.
You know what? I think we're going to go to the East Coast Finals. That's all I can say. It's going to be definitely interesting. Like I said, it's going to be on health. I would love to see the Capitals get another one. I know there's always going to be that asterisk next to the 2021. I know that's how it's going to be in every other sport, but I think the Caps could pull it off. If not, I think West Coast, if anybody from the West Coast pulls it off, I think it's going to be the Blues. I think the Golden Knights crash. Yeah, I think they could. I seriously think it's a solid team out there. The Bruins are nice also, but I think with all this time off, with a little bit of sickness going around the team, I think we could potentially outdo them.
Well, hey, thank you so much, Garrett. That was fantastic.
Appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely be bringing you back for hockey because we're gonna need you. So, not to boot you, but whenever you're ready to roll, we'll jump on to the next thing. Thank you, Garrett.
He's got to get back to
Thanks,
the pick cut. He's got to get back to the pick cut.
I gotta go back to building my dynasty on NHL 20. You know.
Later, man.
There we go.
All right, boys. Hey, I appreciate having
Later, brother.
you guys having me on here. It's been real. See you guys. Have a good one.
Go
Take it,
Canes.
He left with the biggest smile on his face. That's what we like to see. One heck of a hockey segment that we just had there, but let's switch gears because I want to keep the ball rolling. We're going to move right into fantasy football, and I'm going to have a lot more to say about this topic. For today, we are going to do the first round, the top 12 picks that we personally find. The three of us are in a fantasy football league. We've referenced it multiple times, so this is not new information to anyone that has listened to our podcast before. We follow a half PPR 12-team format, so that is exactly how we're going to draft out this first round. And the goal is for today to just do the first round and talk about the first 12 picks and in a half PPR format. And I think our idea is to start with number 1 and work our way all the way through the first round to number 12, and then each pick talk about who we think should be taken at that pick and kind of argue our cases. And then at the end of the entire thing, we can talk about, a few sleepers that we have or bounce back candidates. And then in a future episode, I think the three of us will come on here and actually do a full mock draft where we get a certain pick number and go through every single round and draft. So for now, we'll start with that. You guys have anything you want to say or add before we get started? Otherwise, we can go right into pick number 1. So whenever you guys.
Let's do it.
I love it. Fantasy football guy side teeing us up really, really well. So do you want us to decide to just start? Do you want me? I can go ahead first. Do you want me to just name my first pick and then we'll all kind of name our number 1 pick?
I was thinking the way we'll do it is I'll just say first pick on the clock and then we'll just talk about it. So first pick on the clock, Zach, who you got?
100% Christian McCaffrey. You can't pass up on a guy like this. Just a quick 2 cents on Christian McCaffrey. This guy doesn't have a quarterback. Well, he's got Teddy Bridgewater, so he doesn't have a quarterback. He also didn't have a quarterback last year, and he still put up insane numbers. He's going to get his receptions. He's going to get his rushing yards. I think he takes a step up. I think he takes even more of a dominant role, getting paid. I believe he's now the highest paid running back in the history of football. So he's definitely carrying the Panthers on his back, just like Jakubek carried the NHL segment on his back. But I think Christian McCaffrey is going to take a huge leap this year, and he's my number 1, undisputed.
I just want to jump in real quick and say, please don't disrespect Teddy Bridgewater. That man showed you what he could do last year when he's given the opportunity to play on a good team. I don't necessarily know the Panthers were the best fit, but don't want to get too far off topic. Do not compare Teddy Bridgewater to Kyle Allen, though. That is just disrespectful. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, CMAC is a cheat code. So wait, are we doing this mock draft style? Or are we all making each pick?
No, we're all gonna go the first pick.
Yeah.
We can just talk about
okay.
Because we're gonna
Yeah, no, I'm not going to elaborate too much on that. I mean, CMAC, obviously, at number 1. He last year was basically a fantasy football cheat code. So, I mean, if you had him, the percentage, I actually didn't see the data on it, but I would have to think, the percentage of championship winning teams that had him was really high. I mean, he just was above and beyond, anyone else. So, you got to go to him again this year.
If I remember correctly, Lamar Jackson was number 1 in terms of the number of people that had a fantasy championship, just because he was obviously picked much later in the draft than McCaffrey was 2, but that makes sense. McCaffrey should be first this year. I think there could be an argument made for Saquon Barkley for certain people if you're concerned about the workload that McCaffrey had last year, but I don't like to necessarily fully project out injuries for guys that were workhorses last year. The one thing that I do think that's worth noting is McCaffrey last year, and I haven't done the full math on this, but let's just say if you took out all of his receiving yardage and receptions and touchdowns, he probably would have still finished the top 10 running back because he had he basically had 1,400 yards rushing and 15 touchdowns without any receiving stats. And then if you got rid of his rushing yards, his receiving would have been 116 receptions with 1,005 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. So he probably would have finished as a top 25 receiver without any rushing touchdowns. And you combine the two, and it is just absolutely ridiculous. It's one of the greatest two-way fantasy football seasons we've ever seen from a running back. So,
and final thing on McCaffrey, another reason why he should be the undisputed number one pick of the draft is everyone's got their quarantine lifestyle. This man has chosen to quarantine with Miss America this entire time. So hats off to McCaffrey. With that, we'll transition over to number 2. Evan, give us the number 2 pick right now in the draft.
Yeah, I've got Barkley at 2. Probably not a huge surprise there. I just think the talent. I think you have to take him in this spot over some of the other guys. I mean, last year, obviously, with the injury, is obviously going to be a down year. And even when he came back, the productivity wasn't quite there, which is why I'm maybe concerned about taking him at 2. But I just think with the talent, the Giants get a little bit better. They get some offensive line help. Daniel Jones should be better. The offense as a whole should be a little bit better. And obviously, he should be healthy. So I'll take the talent there with Barkley at 2.
What about you, Zach?
I've got Barkley too. Pretty much, Evan hit it straight on. I think Barkley, just from a half PPR standpoint, pushes him above some of the other guys I had at number 2, potential number 2. I think a healthy Barkley is unstoppable, full of potential, and I'd be willing to see that at the 2 spot as well.
Yeah, so I think like Evan was saying earlier, the fact that he was a little bit injured and might have had a little bit of regression after he came back makes him a little bit nervous. For me, I don't have any nervousness. The first 2 picks are just a straight shot for me. It's McCaffrey, Barkley. There's no questions asked, because in terms of half PPR, we're talking receiving value and rushing value, and those 2 in both ends of that spectrum are so damn good. I mean, obviously, nobody's McCaffrey level running back receiving wise because McCaffrey's running slot routes and stuff, but you can pretty much guarantee over 50 receptions for Barkley, maybe more than that. And you'll get the one of the best pure running backs in the league. And also, I think another year with Daniel Jones as his quarterback, you might even be able to argue that this season Barkley might take that next step and move to the number 1 again. We don't know that. That's a certain possibility. So Saquon Barkley is my easy number 2. I think the first 2 were really easy picks. And I think the number 3 pick might be easy too, because I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to go with Zeke Elliott, number 3. Again, that's a hard one for me to move away from, because they still have a great offensive line. Zeke is he just got his contract, so he got paid. So they're definitely going to use him. There's no reason not to. That offense is better than it's ever been with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup and Dak Prescott coming off a great year. I think there's going to be more holes than he's ever had, because defenses are going to actually have to respect the receiving game more than they ever have. So I think Zeke puts up monster numbers on the ground. He also has the potential to have a decent receiving year, and he could get up from 35 to 40 receptions just on dump offs. So I think overall Zeke was the easy number 3 for me.
I'd probably jump in here too. I actually have Alvin Kamara at number 3. And the reason why I have Kamara is I see a bounce back year. Just from a PPR standpoint, he's more of an attractive guy than Zeke. Now, obviously, Zeke, gets more carries on the ground. He had 300 touches last year. I would expect something relatively similar, just given his new contract. The Cowboys are definitely going to try to get his utilization out of him. But I like Kamara. I find him exciting just because I feel like he acknowledges that he had, somewhat of a disappointing season, so much that they actually turned to other running backs, but in Sean Payton's scheme. And so I think Alvin Kamara is going to come back with a chip on his shoulder. Like Cy mentioned with Dallas, I also see the same point in New Orleans, in that you have a lot of receiving threats to kind of prevent the 7, 8, 9 in the box. And from a defensive standpoint, I think Breeze just has easy dump offs, and I think Kamara takes advantage of them. So I have Kamara at 3, but it was a very close one.
And I'm going to go off the board from you guys as well. I'm going to go Dalvin Cook at 3. I'm going to take a bit more of a risky choice here and go for a little more upside. If you look at like the first half of last year, where he was neck and neck with McCaffrey in some ways, in terms of the production he was putting up. So I'm going to take a bit of a risk here, go for that upside, maybe a little biased just because Zeke is on the Cowboys. I never like taking him at the top. And because he's less of a receiving threat, certainly, than Dalvin. And you lose Diggs, the offense even more so now will run through Dalvin, which of course, again, with the injury risk makes, I think, people a little nervous. But I'm gonna jump to Dalvin at 3.
Okay, so let me jump in real quick. First of all, Evan knows how much I love Dalvin Cook, because at the beginning of last season, I was the biggest Dalvin Cook fanboy that you could have met. I told everybody every draft that I get a chance to take Dalvin Cook, I'm going to take him. And I don't remember if it was Evan, but I know Cam and Evan in our group chat were like, oh, I don't know why you would want to take Dalvin Cook. Like, he's an injury risk. Like, he's never been proven. And I just pointed to the fact that that offense is finally going to be running the football because their previous coordinator refused to run the ball. And Dalvin has all the potential in the world in a good offense. And clearly he showed up last year, and Evan made the great point of what he did. So if Dalvin Cook didn't have some risks behind him, I would take him number 3. My big risk right now with Dalvin Cook, and quite frankly, I would have had Dalvin Cook right there with Zeke, if not, is that he's currently holding out. He's in a very similar situation to Le'Veon Bell and Ezekiel Elliott, more so Le'Veon Bell, where he wants to get paid now that he had a good season last year and was, the focal point of the offense last year. He's looking for more money. And for me, the most important thing, and this is also the same reason that as much as I love Kamara and I do think he's going to bounce back, I didn't have him number 3, is in the top of the fantasy football draft, when you have the top 3 picks, safety is the most important thing to me. Consistency is the most important thing to me because those guys are going to anchor your team. If you have a top 3 pick, you're not getting the pick again until the end of the second round. So my goal is to take guys that, even if there might be a guy after them that could have a marginally better season, if you know this guy is going to consistently provide that production, that is the guy I want, which is why I had Zeke at 3, because Zeke, every single season that he has played, has been a top 3 finish, top 3 to 4 running back in the league, and you never had to worry about that. Kamara had a down year last year, albeit some of that might be his ankle issue. Hopefully he comes back fully healthy, and we'll see him bounce back. But he has some question marks in terms of how he finished last year. And then Dalvin Cook is, and my other point being that if he holds out, that's an issue, and he has shoulder injury issues. So for that reason, I have Zeke just slightly higher than both of them, which is my logic behind why I have Zeke 3rd. But I do actually have Kamara 4th and McCaffrey, or Kamara 4th and Cook 5th. So I can just hit those 2 right now because for me, Kamara, I do think has a bounce back season. I think he has far more receptions than he had last year. I think you see more receiving yardage. I also think his touchdown production goes up and his rushing will marginally increase. I think part of the concern for rushing for me with Kamara is that I wish he would get more opportunities, but part of my concern is Latavius Murray is very involved in that offense now. And as you guys saw last year, he was a beast last year whenever he got the ball. So I do think Sean Payton is going to get Murray involved to take some of the weight off Kamara coming off her injury season, which is why I don't see him getting as many rushes as some of these other guys in the top 5 to 6. So I have Kamara at 4 for that reason. I'll talk about Dalvin later at 5th, but I'll let you guys go with your number 4.
Cool. I'll jump in here. I can actually knock out my 4 and 5 too,
Okay.
just to keep things moving. So Zeke is my 4. To everything that Sai said, I love the consistency part of it. You know what you're getting in Zeke, right? When you draft him, when you draft Zeke, there's a moment of relief, right? Because you know he's going to receive the carries. You know he's not obsolete in a PPR league either. I mean, you're going to see him getting 40, 50 receptions, which I would consider actually somewhat decent for his size and stature. He's a great check down guy for Dak, and Dak is infamous for missing reads early and going with a check down as a result of it. So I think Zeke is definitely a safe pick there to Sai's point. Moving over to 5, let's go wide receivers. I'll give you one. Mike Thomas, let's go. 149 receptions for this man last year, breaking Marvin Harrison's record, I believe, your fellow Colts Sai at 143. So, great accomplishment for Mike Thomas. I don't see any slowdown. I've been watching this guy and applauding him since college at Ohio State. I'm excited to see what he does under Drew Brees and the rest of the regime there. I think the only negative on Mike Thomas is we saw the acquisition of Emmanuel Sanders. And so how many touches, how many receptions does he steal away from him? I still don't see it too much. So Mike Thomas is my number 5.
Interesting. So I guess I'm at 4. I have Zeke here. I mean, like you guys said, I don't need to add anything there. But I'll slide in Zeke there, I guess. Should I do my 5 too, or did you want to talk about Dalvin more?
No, go ahead.
Do your 5, yeah.
My number 5. So excited for this one. You had to figure it was coming higher, higher than you guys will have him. It's Derrick Henry, my boy.
I knew it.
Honestly, as a pure runner, this dude is elite. And you talk about workload. The workload again this year figures to be just obnoxious. I mean, talk about Zeke always having a workload. I mean, Derrick's workload is just obnoxious. The only risk maybe with that is obviously comes, the more totes, the more injury risk. But for this huge of a guy, I don't really worry about the injuries too much. Tannehill's back. The offense should still be good. The only knock with Henry is obviously the lack of receptions, but he always finds a way to get one reception every game. And a lot of times it's a silly little screen pass that if he catches it, because he does drop a lot of them, but it's going to go for like 30 yards. But man, I just love this guy, the consistency. I mean, obviously I had him last year and then the playoffs the year before where he won me a championship. I mean, he honestly just put up obnoxious numbers last year. And I don't see any reason to why he won't do that again, to be honest.
So here's my concern with both of the guys that you guys have at 5, as high as they are. Michael Thomas, I don't have a problem with them being 5. If it was full PPR, I would fully agree with them being 5 or 4. Big thing with Michael Thomas for me is he's not a huge touchdown guy. Even in one of the greatest seasons ever last year, he scored 9 touchdowns. He did not reach double-digit touchdowns. He also had 144 receptions with 1,700 yards receiving last year. The odds of him reaching that number of receptions and that yardage again is extremely unlikely. I mean, he just had arguably the greatest season in terms of receptions and receiving yards ever. The chances of that happening again, especially in a tougher division and another year coming back, getting that kind of workload with more pieces to the offense, makes it a little bit riskier for me to think that he could replicate that. And I would feel less concerned about having him as a top 5, top 6 option like we had like Antonio Brown and Julio Jones for years in the past couple of years. But the reason that we didn't have as much concerns about having those guys as high as we did is even if they didn't have that number of receptions, we knew they'd have the touchdowns. They were always shoo-ins for 12 to 14 touchdowns a game. Michael Thomas, I cannot trust him to have that many touchdowns a game. And although I do think he is arguably the best receiver in football right now, I think fantasy-wise, I would have him a little bit lower for that reason. Moving over to Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry has reached the ceiling, in my opinion, right? Like no matter what they do next season, this season he had 1,500 yards rushing and 16 touchdowns. He will not get more than I think last year he had a total of 18 receptions for 200 yards. There's no
one per game, baby.
Yeah, so he basically gets 1 reception a game, which is just not really relevant, except for maybe one game where he breaks one, like Evan said. But the part that concerns me is his workload these last 2 years has been absolutely ridiculous. He had to carry a team throughout the playoffs. He's going to have to get 300 carries again in a new offense with the changing pieces. And even though Tannehill played in the playoffs, they're starting a season with them. There's a lot of concerns with Henry wear and tear wise with him having carried the ball as much as he does. And if for some reason they start stacking the box and Tannehill is struggling, then all of a sudden he's not useful in the receiving game. And a guy that just reached his ceiling won't be able to reach his ceiling again. And that's the concern for me, because if Derrick Henry doesn't score touchdowns, Derrick Henry isn't even a top 12 back. That's the problem.
But Cy, he's 1,000% going to score touchdowns. He's massive. They feed him 3 times consecutively on the goal line. He's going to score touchdowns. That's not a question.
He will score touchdowns if you fully believe the Titans are a team that are going to score a lot of points next season. I do not believe the Titans are a team that are going to score a lot of points next season. And I also believe that teams are more likely to stack the box and challenge Tannehill after half a great season and a huge contract. And I think that's going to pay dividends. As a matter of fact, I think A.J. Brown will benefit more than Derrick Henry will next season, but he's not in my top 12, so I won't talk about that anymore.
They already stacked the box against Tannehill last year, and Derrick Henry still ran over everyone.
That is only in the playoffs. We'll see. I'm just pointing to the fact that he already reached his ceiling, and there's plenty of guys that are running backs that have the dual threat ability where even if they're stopped in the run game, they're a safe bet in the passing game. Whereas, because I believe you have Henry in front of Kamara, which I think is a little bit riskier in terms of overall production, because Kamara's ceiling is higher than Henry's, in my opinion. But I mean, teach their own. Of course, it's the 5th pick, and I can't fault you for taking Henry. But I was just giving my arguments.
Jump into 6 because I have Kamara, though. But I would argue it's maybe not riskier because if you look at Kamara, you don't get quite the touches. And that's not going to change. I mean, the Saints said last year they don't want to overload him with touches just because he's a smaller guy. You know, he's more that type of back. They have Latavius, who's more of a true runner. That's not going to change. He's still going to get the same amount of touches. I haven't heard anything otherwise. I don't know why that would change. So in that sense, I mean, getting less touches, Derrick Henry's going to get the totes.
The thing is, though, Kamara did get more than enough touches in terms of carries and receptions last season. The problem was that he was hurt for a couple of games, so he didn't get production in those games, which is why his totals weren't as high. The other problem was he was less efficient with his touches. that wasn't because Kamara regressed. It was because Kamara was playing with a high ankle sprain the entire season. He comes back healthy. Those touches end up being a lot more lethal, in my opinion, because the Saints offense is arguably the best offense in football. It might not even be arguable. It's probably the best offense in football, right there with the Chiefs, given the fact that they've basically gotten better by adding Emmanuel Sanders and having another year of Jared Cook with arguably the best receiver in the league and Drew Brees coming off a great season. I think Kamara only gets better. Whereas Henry, the best he can do is what he did last season. And if he does that, then he's worth maybe the 5th or 6th pick. But if he doesn't do that, then all of a sudden you're looking at a guy that might fall out of the first round. That's the way I look at it.
Well, but if you look at Henry through week 14, if I'm not mistaken, because he also pulled a hammy, and in weeks 15 he played maybe half the snaps. Week 16 didn't play. I'm pretty sure he was like a top 3, not even that far off like those guys back. So I do agree with you. He probably hit his ceiling, but if you factor out the last couple of weeks where he was injured, his ceiling is like a top 3 running back.
Do you think Derrick Henry will rush for 1,600 yards again this season and 16 touchdowns?
I don't see why not.
All right, that's where we disagree. Fair enough. Zebo.
Moving on to my 6 and 7. I'm gonna go with 2 more receivers. I'm really high on the receivers in this draft. One of them is
give me 6.
Oh yeah, so my 6 is Davante Adams, and my 7. Oh, you want me to just give my 6?
Just give your 6.
Gotcha. Okay, I'll talk about Davante for a little bit. So the Green Bay free agency portal and draft was very interesting because it was non-existent. There was the initial reaction of the Jordan Love draft, right? The quarterback in the first round, putting Aaron Rodgers on the hot seat, almost more of like a disciplinarian move from the head coach. And so I think between that and I think between just like the lack of drafting like a top tier receiver when they had plenty of opportunity to, goes to show you that Davante is still kind of on an island and he's still the go-to guy. Rodgers isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And so I think that the Rodgers-Davante Adams chemistry is due for a kind of a comeback season, right? I know they hit it off in 2018. Davante really, truly established himself as a top-tier receiver in 2018, was one of the highest performing receivers. And I can definitely see him get back to those glory days if he just stays healthy. Just because I think he's going to, from a sheer target standpoint, Rodgers is one of the most accurate quarterbacks, and he's also going to be targeting Davante Adams more so than any other wide receiver on that roster because there is no competition. So I can actually see a world where Davante could potentially get targeted over 150, maybe 200 times. We'll see how well he does, but I definitely think that's a risk that's willing to take because I think he's definitely trying to make his way back out and make a splash. So Davante's my 6 for those reasons.
Go ahead, E. You already gave your 6, didn't you?
Yeah, I gave 6 with Kamara. I won't add anything. Do you want to do your 6?
Cool. My 6 is Michael Thomas. For the same reason Zach listed earlier, I think Michael Thomas will continue to be extremely productive in terms of receptions and yards. And I don't need to really go like too much more into detail on that one because of the fact that we talked plenty about him earlier. But I'll go right into my 7 because my 7 is actually also Davante Adams, Zach. I actually have Michael Thomas at 6 just to be a little bit safer. But I'm going to say it right now. I think if all things stay the way they are, I think Davante Adams ends up being the number 1 receiver in fantasy football this year. I think the real reason he wasn't last year is because he got hurt. But before last year, consistently, I think for 2 to 3 years in a row, Davante Adams finished as a top 3 receiver because Adams is somebody that gets a ton of targets, that he converts into a lot of receptions, converts into a lot of yards, and he adds the touchdown factor. I think he had double-digit touchdowns for, I believe, 3 straight years before last year. And he almost had double-digit last year, even after missing, I think it was like 3 or 4 games. And like Zach said, I don't see any reason for him not to be targeted the same way that he has the last couple of seasons because he's still young. He's still got those legs under him, and he's coming in healthy this season, and Rodgers will feed him because I don't see any other receivers as a threat to his targets. I actually think he will finish the season again as the number 1 overall wide receiver, but I'm picking Thomas just a little bit ahead of him as a safe pick because I like to be safe in the first round. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if Davante Adams finishes number 1 in receiving.
Yeah, and piggybacking off that, my number 7 is Michael Thomas for the same reasons kind of you mentioned. I just think he's the safer option. I do agree, like, because he's not necessarily as talented as some of those other receivers, Nuke, Devontae, just because he doesn't have that burning speed necessarily. And like Sai, you said, he's not really a touchdown guy. I mean, even like before last year, he was even less so. And last year wasn't necessarily anything terribly special from a touchdowns perspective. But I do think he has another good year, but it's just impossible to replicate what he did last year. That's why I have him at 7 instead of being higher. Maybe where Zach had him. But.
Cool.
Zebo, who you got?
Moving over to my 7. And I'm all about the receivers, apparently. I'm going to go with D-Hop, DeAndre Hopkins. I think despite the fact that he has moved teams, he's moved on, arguably to a worse organization, a team that hasn't seen the playoffs in quite a while, in the Arizona Cardinals. I think that D-Hop will treat this as a new opportunity to kind of rebrand himself with a new quarterback who's a gunslinger. And if you just look at like stats, Christian Kirk was, I guess you could argue, the number 1 receiver in Arizona last year. He actually put up really decent numbers for being kind of this new talent that really hadn't established himself as a tier 1, tier 2 receiver. He was kind of just there, but he was actually very productive in last season at least. And just based off of the offensive scheme and system that Cliff Kingsbury runs, I mean, it's 5 wide immediately. That was the way that Kyler Murray had his welcome to the NFL moment, was not run the football, get yourself confident, get some first downs. No, it was like, hey, we're going to start you off on your own 15, 20-yard line, and we're going to run 5 wide, and this is your team. Go ahead and take it. And I actually love that from a receiving standpoint. And D-Hop, and probably a great news of why he went there from an aging Houston Texans offense, or at least system, to a very new, almost college-oriented Hail Mary system. So I'm excited to see what D-Hop does with this new gunslinger quarterback in Kyler Murray. And I think Kyler is going to throw a lot, given the fact that, if he can stay healthy. So I think D-Hop has a great opportunity to rebrand himself. And his talent is, no one's questioning his talent, so we'll just see where it goes.
I'm gonna jump in. I actually am not big on DeAndre Hopkins this year, which should be surprising to a lot of people, because I've been the biggest proponent of considering DeAndre Hopkins a top 3 receiver in the NFL the last 5 years. Zach and I have had this conversation so many times. I still consider DeAndre Hopkins talent-wise a top 3 to 4 receiver in the NFL. I think he's truly something special in terms of everything that he brings to the table. But fantasy isn't always about who is the best in real life. Fantasy is about situations and kind of what kind of position you're in. For me, the problem with DeAndre Hopkins is last season already was a year where he regressed, not because of his own ability, but because of the system that he was in Houston with what was going on. But it's not because he wasn't getting targets and he wasn't being given the opportunity. He played 15 games last season and had over 111 receptions, and I think it was like, I'm taking a gainer, but I think it was 1,165 yards and 7 touchdowns. So his touchdowns were down, his receptions were around where they usually are, but his yardage and touchdowns were both down, and I think he ended up finishing outside of the top 5 in terms of fantasy wide receivers. My big thing with DeAndre Hopkins is he switches over to what I would argue is overall a better offense, but not overall a better fit in terms of his fantasy potential, because on the Texans, he was getting a lot more targets than I think he will on the Cardinals, mainly because on the Texans, all those supporting cast receivers that he had always got hurt. Like they weren't there. They didn't have anyone else to throw to. And Deshaun Watson's game plan was run in circles behind a terrible offensive line that they never decided to fix and just chuck up balls to DeAndre Hopkins. And DeAndre Hopkins, being the big bad man that he is, was winning those catches and was getting his potential out of there. I think on the Cardinals with Larry Fitzgerald, with Christian Kirk, with Kenyon Drake, with all these other people around him that are actually solid options, I think he gets less targets and he has to do more with less. And for that reason, I actually think he regresses a little bit more. I think he probably finishes in the lower half of the top 10 for wide receivers in terms of fantasy, which is why I don't have him. Actually, you'll see on my list, I don't even have him in my top 12, which is crazy. But he did not finish as a top 12 fantasy player this past season in half PPR. I don't believe I didn't factor in for without quarterbacks, but he didn't, and I don't think he's going to do it this season. I just don't see a reason why he would. But my number 7 is sorry, I'm on number 8 now, right?
Yeah, you're on number
No.
8. I think you gave your 6 and 7, right?
Yeah, give my 6 and 7. My number 8 is Derrick Henry. It's not that I have him out of my first round. I just don't have him as high as some of the other guys. I still think he's going to have good rushing yardage, but I'm projecting him for more I think he gets a little bit more receiving yards. I think he ends up at closer to like 250, 300 receiving yards, but I project he gets closer to that 1,300 rushing yard range, and I think he'll end up with a total of maybe 12 touchdowns. I don't project him to get 16 again because I do think the Tennessee offense scores less than it did last year overall. And I think the rushing game, just because of the number of carries Derrick Henry has had, I think it regresses just a little bit because, not that I'm going to assume injuries, but he's had to carry a big load the last 2 years, and there's a lot of wear and tear on running backs. So I have him at 8 for that reason.
All right. No complaints there. My number 8 is going to be, and this one makes me so nervous, but because I feel like a lot of people last year bought into the hype train and didn't really get rewarded for it, but it's Joe Mixon. And I just think with getting Joe Burrow in there, hopefully, I guess AJ Green's still there. Hopefully he's healthy, which he probably won't be. But you have obviously Tyler Boyd there. Drafted some receivers. Like, I just think the offense overall is going to be better. I love the talent with Mixon. I just think there's so much talent there in the receiving game, in the run game, so much athleticism. I think we get a big bounce back year, and I think he, kind of establishes himself as I think the guy everyone thought he was going to be starting last year as a first round pick in fantasy drafts and really even creeping up towards the upper half almost. So makes me a little nervous, but I do like Mixon a lot this year. So I'm going to take him there at 8.
Yeah, piggybacking off of you, Ev, I'm a little mixed on Mixon, so I'm gonna move on to somebody else here, and I'm gonna go with Derrick Henry. I'll mention him at 8 here, and the reason why I do like Derrick Henry is I hear what you're saying, Sai, with the utilization, right, of him. I mean, he's carrying the ball like 30 times a game, despite his strong stature and size. That's going to take inevitable wear and tear on anybody, right? But one thing that I really do like about Derrick Henry is the offense that he plays under. It wasn't too long ago when the Tennessee Titans were a broken team. They were arguably, they had like this defense under Mike Vrabel that was always prioritized, but there was just something missing on the offensive side of things. Marcus Mariota clearly wasn't the answer, but they were too stubborn to give up on him. And until they finally got Ryan Tannehill, it was like this new regenerated spark in Nashville. And Ryan Tannehill not only was winning games for them, but you were actually seeing efficiency. We were looking at a Ryan Tannehill that we rarely ever saw in Miami. Someone who was efficient, someone who was throwing for actually more than 250 yards a game, and someone who was actually like making guys like A.J. Brown shine. Corey Davis, I just never saw in him, so he wasn't able to shine. But I think overall the offensive efficiency was impressive. They were winning games, and as a result, defenses didn't have the ability to stack 8 or 9 in the box. And so I think because of that, Derrick Henry will actually see more holes with this play action type of offense that it seems Tennessee is trying to experiment with. And the only other thing I'll say about Derrick Henry is we haven't talked about his blocking. I'm not even talking about the offensive line blocking. I'm talking about him using defenders as human blockers, a.k.a. Earl Thomas. Shout out Earl Thomas, who literally got stiff arms so hard he did a complete 180 and had no idea where he was. So I think from that capability, I've never seen a running back have that ability, maybe outside of Jerome Bettis. Definitely think Derrick Henry deserves more credit than Sai, I think you've given him today.
But he put him higher in his order than you did, so.
That's because I'm really high on the wide receiver.
So who's really shortchanging him?
I gave him some credit here. I'm just not giving him as much credit as Evan is. I actually think I gave him more credit than you did if we're gonna make that argument. Because you had him at 9, right?
I had him at 8.
So he had him a pick higher.
Oh, did you have him at 8, Zach?
I had him at 8, so right around the same.
Oh no, we had the same pick. We both had him at 8.
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, it's an equal amount of credit. E, you want to proceed with your next one?
So I'm on 9 here. you guys kind of convinced me on Davante Adams here. I might pivot a little bit. I was going to have him lower, but yeah, I do think obviously being healthy, I think bounce back here. I do. Maybe I'll say this if we do get to a sleeper segment like Allen Lazard a lot, but there's really not much there in terms of other targets. Obviously, Aaron Jones is going to get a ton of volume, but I do think Davante has bounced back year, and potentially, Sai, you might be onto something with him ending the season as the number one receiver, which everyone thought he would be last year. And I was big on him going into last year, so I'll put him at 9.
You know what's interesting about Davante Adams for me also is as far as a consistent first round pick goes over the last 3 to 4 years, he's probably the least sexy name you'll see, right? Like you see Davante Adams and nobody's like, oh, that's like super attractive in terms of names. Like it doesn't jump out the way a Julio Jones or a Antonio Brown or DeAndre Hopkins has to us in the last couple of years. But that's what's funny to me because outside of all those guys, he's actually been the most consistent in terms of producing top 2 to 3 fantasy football potential because he's always had the yards, always had the receptions, and always had the touchdowns. Whereas some of these guys have been good in certain parts, but not as good in the other. Whereas he's always been all 3. So yeah, I'm happy to hear that you're coming around to because I do really believe in him. I'll jump over to my next pick. I believe I'm on 9. Speaking of, I have Julio Jones at number 9. There isn't much that needs to be said about that. I actually think he'll have a better season this year than he did last year. I think, every year I say, okay, he's going to have a few more touchdowns than the previous one. And I think I might actually believe that he has around the same amount of receiving yards, same amount. I always project him for around 100 receptions, around 13 to 1,400 receiving yards because that's just what he does. But I actually think I'm going to give him around 9 touchdowns. And I think Julio Jones is going to finish as the top 3, maybe top 4 receiver for me this year. He's just a consistent guy. It doesn't matter what the situation is. He still is the most talented receiver in the NFL. So Julio Jones is going to be my number 9. There isn't much else that needs to be said about it.
I love that pick, Sai. You're definitely going to get my stamp of approval being a Falcons fan. And I think to your point too, Sai, is when a guy like Julio Jones can be consistent year over year, when you had Steve Sarkisian as your offensive coordinator, the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit. But I'm going to move on to 9. I know this is going to be a controversial pick. So I did a little bit of reading just to back up my claim here, and it looks like it was leaning my direction. So this will be interesting. My number 9 is Dalvin Cook. The reason why he slipped so far is not necessarily because of the holdout. Now, albeit there are, just given the track record with recent holdouts, Melvin Gordon actually held out for the first couple games during the season. Whereas you normally think those would get resolved. You don't always see that case. Zeke was actually a huge threat last year up until a week, 2 weeks before the season started. So it's definitely a legitimate scare, but I'm actually going to go a different direction. And the direction is actually Alexander Mattison, the new running back out of Boise State. This guy is, from a productivity standpoint, was one of the most interesting rookies to watch last year because he moves exactly like Dalvin Cook. He's so agile. He's super quick. He's kind of a natural receiving back as well. And obviously there's a talent difference with Dalvin at FSU and Madison coming from a smaller school in Boise State. But both had over 100 carries last year. And Alexander Mattison had a better yards per carry. He averaged 4.6 a carry to Dalvin Cook's 4.5. The reason why I bring this up is, what if Minnesota front office, they've seen the game. They've seen the game that the Chargers and Gordon played. The Chargers won. Melvin caved. He didn't get more money. What if Minnesota takes a direction? They actually go with the young kid that has no mileage on him, that is ready to run, make a splash, and has been underproven his entire career. If he's going to Boise State, this guy's looking for blood. He's definitely looking for the opportunity. And I think that if I were in the front office of Minnesota, I would give this Alexander Mattison a shot, because you only know that running back's leverage is to his backup, right? Zeke knew he was going to get paid because no-name Tony Pollard was behind him. This is a different story. I think Alexander Mattison brings a lot to the table, and I think Dalvin Cook should be a little worried. So that's my 9.
Zach, I would agree with you if we're talking about some older running back that's coming to the end of his shelf life and, doesn't have a lot left in him. Then you move to the younger guy You don't want to pay them. Like Le'Veon Bell, for example, was several years into his contract playing with the Steelers, having amassed immense amounts of carries over like 3 or 4 seasons before that holdout happened, when the Steelers decided we're not going to pay you, we're going to move forward with James Conner. However, I think you're really underrating how significant Dalvin Cook was to the Minnesota Vikings offense last year. He carried the weight on his shoulder. You're right that Madison was very productive. He's probably the best handcuff in fantasy football right now, for especially with the holdout in mind. If you'd argue to me that you had Dalvin Cook at 9 because of the holdout, I would agree with you. But to say Dalvin Cook at 9 is because you're concerned about him having carries taken away, I would question why you wouldn't have Alvin Kamara lower, because I think Latavius Murray gets more usage in that offense than Alexander Madison does in the Vikings offense, given the offensive coordinators and the way that it's worked. Dalvin Cook last year wasn't just an incredible runner. He had a 4.5 yards per carry, but he had a heck of a lot more carries than Madison. And I bet you if Madison had more carries, he'd certainly finish with a lower yards per carry than Dalvin Cook did. Dalvin Cook was probably the second best running back in football last season over the 16-game span, because he not only had close to 1,200 yards carrying, and I believe it was like 13 touchdowns, he also had over 50 receptions and 519 receiving yards. And surprisingly, with that many receptions and that many receiving yards, had 0 receiving touchdowns. You think if he replicates those numbers of receptions next year, he's not going to have more touchdowns? We're talking about a guy that could finish with 15 to 16 all-purpose touchdowns, around 16 to 1,700 yards total, and with over 50 receptions and half PPR. If he doesn't hold out, Dalvin Cook could very easily finish as the second or third best player in fantasy football, right behind McCaffrey and Barkley. The only reason I didn't have Dalvin Cook higher is because of Zeke. As good as Madison is, Cook is too young for them to be like, let's move away from Cook. The only way it happens is if he holds out and they say, let's give Madison the chance. If Cook is playing, he's still getting 75% of the snaps, if not more. And he's still getting more snaps than Kamara is, if we're going to talk about it that way. So that's why I firmly believe Dalvin Cook should be higher if he doesn't hold out.
And just to touch on that, the reason why I think it could be an issue is certainly because of the holdout. And I think it's because of the front office's maybe unwillingness to negotiate the way Dalvin would want them to negotiate, because they know they have a guy like Alexander Madison in their back pocket. But I do like your point, Cy, in that Dalvin's 24, Alexander Madison's 22. They're both still super young. You're not going to move away from a guy or not want to work with him just because of a money issue. You would normally see that get cleared up between the two. So I see your point on that as well.
I will ask one last question, and not to keep Evan. Who do you think the number one player on the Vikings was last year that caused them to be a playoff team and a team that beat the Saints in the first round of the playoffs? Like, if you had to pick one player that was the most responsible for that, who would it be? For me, that answer is Dalvin Cook.
I mean, there's only one answer to that. I mean, there's no one you could even put into that conversation.
Please
don't argue for Kirk
Thielen, dude. Thielen's great.
Thielen is good.
They got rid of Stephon Diggs. They're keeping Thielen. Thielen's going to be their number one guy.
Yeah,
you're talking about Thielen for last year?
Yeah, and actually, if you want to speak about the New Orleans-Minnesota game, Thielen was the one who actually won it for him.
Zach,
I was about to be on you, though.
Zach, Thielen played 10 games last season, had 30 receptions for 418 yards. And you're going to tell me he's the reason they made the playoffs and won the game. Get out of here, bro.
Year over year, Thielen's a beast. All right, anyways.
Yeah, there's no way.
I digress.
I will say, though, Zach, that was pretty good analysis. I actually think the Melvin Gordon comp is really good because you did make a good point in that Dalvin is still super young. It's not like he's some aging receiver or running back, but neither was Melvin Gordon.
But how old is he's much better?
Yeah, no, that's where I disagree and agree with you, Cy, is that Dalvin's just on that next tier of
exactly.
Like Melvin had a good fantasy season, but he wasn't as good in real life as Dalvin was last year. Dalvin was a beast. Anyway, keep going. I don't want to digress too much. Yeah.
Is it me on what number 10?
I believe you're on 10. Yeah.
I'm on 10 if you guys are.
Yeah, you're on 10. Yep. Yeah.
All right, I'm trying to prioritize running backs here this year, so I'm going to go with Josh Jacobs actually here in his second year at number 10. So maybe a little higher, but I was really encouraged by what I saw, especially from a usage perspective last year. I mean, obviously going into a rookie season, you just don't know, but obviously got a ton of carries. That shouldn't change. Just like what I saw from a productivity standpoint, I think the offense should be pretty good. I mean, I'm not a Derek Carr fan, but with Waller in there, the receivers are going to be really good this year. getting Ruggsy in there with Tyrell Williams and the guys. I just think the offense is overall better. Plus, I love the moving to Vegas. I think overall maybe the Raiders are a little better. So I just like Josh Jacobs a lot this year. But.
I like that. What about you, Zach? I guess you just hit 10, right?
Yeah, go for it, Zach.
Okay, so I got number 10 here. Number 10 for me is going to be Nick Chubb on the Cleveland Browns. He in a bad offense last season, as a matter of fact, a very bad offense last season, was one of the best fantasy players that you can find. The big thing, honestly, the only reason I don't have Nick Chubb in like my top 5 to 6 is because of the fact that Kareem Hunt will be playing a full season this year and will be taking away from the receptions. If you look at Nick Chubb's stats last year, he had right at 1,500 yards rushing with 8 touchdowns and 36 receptions for an additional close to 300 yards. So all-purpose yards wise, he had almost 1,800 all-purpose yards with almost double-digit touchdowns. That is unbelievable production. And I have no reason to believe Nick Chubb couldn't do that again if Kareem Hunt wasn't in the picture. I think a lot of those receiving yards go away, but I think Nick Chubb actually has more touchdowns this season because I do think the Browns offense gets a little bit better. I mean, quite frankly, they can't be much worse than they were last year, and I think Nick Chubb gets more goal line carries. So although I think his reception yardage goes down, I think his rushing stays relatively in the region of 1,300 to 1,400 yards, but I think he scores over 10 touchdowns, which should easily make him a top 10, top 12 fantasy finisher. So that's why I have Chubb at that pick, just because I think he's got a safe floor. Like, he's not a high ceiling guy for me this year, but his floor is higher than most guys, just given his utilization and the way that he works. Very similar to Derrick Henry, except maybe just a little bit less carries. That's basically the only difference for me.
Yeah, and just echoing off of that, Cy, I'm going to go with Chubb as well at 10. And Cy, actually, funny little aside for you. I know you're a big SEC guy and you follow football religiously down there. So just a couple years ago when Chubb and Michelle were at Georgia, Michelle was actually the lead back. He was more of the flashier type. He was more of like that DeAndre Swift persona where like he's in and out of his cuts, whereas Chubb's just more of that interdisciplined guy. He's going to get you your 5-6 yards. He's going to get you your first downs. You know what's interesting is who would have thought that Chubb has had a more of a successful NFL career than Michelle has so far? Did you foresee that happening?
I don't know if you're quite right on that, though. I don't remember Chubb being the understudy.
Maybe coming into that season, the assumption was Michelle would be the lead back, given that he is a more flashy player. But Nick Chubb, as a guy in the SEC East that watched him at Georgia play my Gamecocks several occasions, he scared everybody way more than Sony Michel ever did. Not because Sony isn't great.
Oh, I don't know about that.
No, they had a great two-headed.
I'm with Cy here.
Nick Chubb was the one that was coming in, getting that bulk of the carries because you could see that every time he touched the ball, he was like a bowling ball that just couldn't be stopped. That's what Nick Chubb always was. So when he got drafted, I always knew Nick Chubb, if he was in the right offense getting the carries, he would be successful. I was actually more concerned about Sony Michel because I felt that Sony Michel was somebody that had the big play potential the way that he was used at Georgia, but he never showed that he could burden a big load because Chubb was the one that was getting more carries. So I'm not surprised to see what Nick Chubb has accomplished in terms of what he's done with the Browns. I mean, he gets the work and he just does what he always did in college. Like, it's actually not even a little bit surprising. He's a beast. That's all I can describe him as, a beast. Yeah,
and just going off your point, side, he is a bowling ball. I mean, but he's got youth. He's got barely any mileage on him, and he's explosive. And even though the Browns didn't have the season that they wanted, and they're a laughingstock last season, I definitely think that Chubb showed plenty of potential last season that will kind of carry him into this season. And so I think the issue here is, are these guys like Josh Jacobs that Evan mentioned, are these guys like Nick Chubb, are they worth first round picks? I think it's definitely going to be a risk. They're all kind of convoluted into one, right? The Aaron Joneses, the Mixons, and then the guys that we just mentioned. It's just based on preference, but I definitely think that Chubb will have a better season than he did last season, and that's why he's going 10 for me.
Yep.
Yeah, and I've got Chubb at 11 there. Same reasons. I do think, like Cy, you said, Kareem Hunt ended up getting a lot of touches, more than people probably expected, and that should continue. So he'll cut into some of that, more so in the receiving game, though. So I don't think it hurts Chubb too bad. And I do think the offense overall gets better, so hopefully he can get some more touchdowns. But I won't add too much.
Cool. Zach, was your 10 or 11, Nick Chubb?
That was my 10, so I'm on 11 right now. I think you are too.
Okay, go ahead. You go first.
So my 11 is actually Lamar Jackson. Uh, I'm surprised he fell this far. I know he's planning a regression here, but I got burned one too many times amongst my 4 leagues last year by Lamar Jackson, including 2 playoff exits. And that was during a matchup where I thought he was going to get benched. So I've just learned from learned from trial and error that I shouldn't pass up on him if I have the chance. And so if he's there at 11 or 12, I'll entertain the idea. But just for the sake of this, I'll go with Lamar Jackson at 11.
Evan, Zach is the reason that guys like Lamar Jackson get picked in the first round. There's always one guy
Yeah.
like, let me go take but they fail to understand the logic of why Lamar Jackson caused so many teams to win their leagues last year. It's because people use the strategy of saying, I'm not going to be crazy enough to draft a quarterback in the first round of my draft. I'm going to wait because every year there's at least 4 to 5 guys that you're going to be able to get in the 10th round range that will be good enough for you to win your league with. And that's who Lamar Jackson was last year, albeit he was on a different level than most years. But I would argue that there was way more people that won by picking Lamar Jackson in the 10th or 11th round than by picking Patrick Mahomes in the first round last year. And that same logic is going to apply to this year, regardless of how good Lamar Jackson is, which, by the way, I don't think he's going to be as astronomically good as he was this season. I don't think he's going to be an MVP again. I think he's going to be very good, but definitely not good enough to be – actually, I don't care if you throw for 60 touchdowns. I'm not taking you in the first round as a quarterback in a half PPR league where if you take Lamar Jackson, you're going to go look at your running backs and receivers after – 4 rounds and be like, oh gosh, why did I do that? Like that's the kind of regrets you're going to have. I think there's plenty of quarterbacks towards the end of the draft this year that are going to be able to make, fill in every single week, and you can definitely mix and match and still have the production that you need and just get much better value in the first round. So I will never pick a quarterback in the first round, but that's just my thing in terms of my fantasy, success over the years.
So
Yeah.
you go ahead.
No, I was just going to give myself a hard time because I've employed that strategy 2 consecutive years, the quarterback strategy. 2 years ago, Patrick Mahomes was my guy. That worked out pretty well. Last year, I was in the same position, and I was, I had made a pretty definitive decision, but I could have taken Lamar. I did not. I chose Mitch Trubisky. Imagine how things would have been different if I had Lamar, because I would have had Lamar, Derrick Henry, all those guys. But I digress.
Your team
Other than the quarterback position, I digress though. And where were we? Cy, were you going to say something?
I think Zach was going to say something. Do you have something for me?
I was just going to say, Cy, if you're so critical of our 11s, what is your 11? I'm curious.
Oh, by all means. And here's where the zinger comes in, because for the life of me, I cannot understand why this guy keeps going in the late second round when I truly believe that he should be a top 12 pick. Number 11 for me is Aaron Jones. I'm very confused by the positioning of him. I think that it's kind of confusing to me that, he's going in the range of people that are less consistent, when in reality, Aaron Jones, his biggest concern in not 2019, but 2018 was literally just, for some reason, Mike McCarthy would not give him the carries. Like, it was anyone that ever watched a Packers game ever understood that Aaron Jones is an absolute beast. You give him that football, he was averaging over 5 yards a carry. And in the receiving game, even though he's not a great receiver, when he got the ball, he was making big moves. So it never really made sense to me. And then last year, all of a sudden, you change Mike McCarthy, you add a new head coach, and look at what happens. Aaron Jones comes out, scores 16 touchdowns with over 1,000 rushing yards, and catches right around 50 passes for right around 500 yards passing. So this guy had a right around 1,500 all-purpose yards. And what was it? He had 3 receivers. He had 19 touchdowns last season all around. I don't think he's going to get 19 touchdowns again. That's a crazy projection for anybody, much less somebody that did it for 1 year. But I do think that he could still finish around the 15 touchdown range all-purpose and still increase upon his rushing yardage, assuming that he's able to get more carries this season, which I think he will. I'm not worried about Jamal Williams or any of their backups. I also think with the whole Rodgers, Jordan Love, whatever situation's going on there, I think their alma mater for going forward is always going to be to run the football, because that's how their offensive coordinator designs his game plans. I think Aaron Jones, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he finishes as a top 5 running back this season. He has that kind of potential, and he's in good enough of an offense and system to do it. So I have Aaron Jones at 11, even though for some his ADP is like 18 or 19.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there too. Aaron Jones is my number 12, and I had the same thoughts when I was making this list. I'm like, am I missing something? Like,
I was
because, and I mean, just to go back to last year, and obviously we're doing half PPR. Aaron Jones is RB2, and part of that is he played a full season. So, Cy, you're saying he has that top 5 potential. He did it last year.
Exactly.
And yes, that was because of the obnoxious amount of touchdowns he scored. Like, just otherworldly red zone usage, which there's no way, again, kind of like Michael Thomas, there's no way that'll happen again. Yeah. But, I mean, they're still going to pound him in the red zone, so he's still going to get a lot of touchdowns. So that's the only area, really, that you could see him regressing. So I think even getting him at 12 is probably a steal in that sense. And then, because, I mean, you look at, again, this is me looking at my data, but Derrick Henry, RB3 there with missing a game as well, who actually would have been RB2 if he played week 16. Just saying. But but yeah, I think Aaron Jones getting him in the first round is great value, even though his ADP is down there at 19. I mean, just ridiculous numbers last year.
And I personally got burned by Aaron Jones so many times last season, and we're talking like 3 or 4 touchdown performances. That was one thing that truly differentiated himself from any of the running backs last year, regardless of aggregate performance, was Aaron Jones was not only consistent, like a 10 to 12 point type of player, right? Actually, maybe a little bit more than that. But he also had games where he truly exploded. We're talking not just multiple touchdowns, like 2 touchdowns. We're talking 3 or 4. Yeah, it was. He
had a 5, I think, against Dallas, didn't he? Or something
and the Packers were, the Packers were just giving him the ball. They just like, we're not going to stop. Like, you think at some point they're going to take him out, try to preserve him, maybe get Aaron Rodgers' stats back up, because I know he's kind of taking a backseat role. He's efficient. He's just kind of taking he doesn't have the explosive numbers that he normally did. Why not just keep giving the ball to Aaron Jones? So I love that point on both your ends, Cy and E. But transition. Oh, and before I actually transition to my 12. Cy, when did you get him last year? Didn't you get him in like the 3rd or 4th round?
Yeah, I was. There's
a 3.
There's 2 guys I was huge on last year at running back. It was Aaron Jones and Dalvin Cook, because those are the 2 guys that I always, when you watch them run the football, you can see that they're clearly just special. Because their yards per carry were always great. But the thing was, everybody was concerned about them because their previous system. Literally, the only problems that those 2 players had coming into last season was their offensive coordinators would not give them a chance to shine. That's really all it was. And last year, you saw it with both of them. You take 2 guys that are uber talented, put them in good offenses, and give them an offensive coordinator that is willing to make them the focal point of an offense, and they explode, which is why I was so excited about both of them. And yeah, I think I got Aaron Jones in the 3rd round. I'm still surprised he went when he did. I'm surprised Dalvin went late 2nd last year. Those things blow my mind. Like, it just seems so obvious, right? Which is why I'm so confused about Aaron Jones this year, because his floor is so good. And also, one point I will say is, Zach, you were saying like he's the one guy that had those massive explosions. I will say that's the truth, with the exception of Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook, specifically Christian McCaffrey. Those 3 to 4 touchdown games that Aaron Jones would have once in a blue moon was every single game for Christian McCaffrey last year, which is what was so absurd about him. So yeah. Anyway, I think you're on. Are you on 12 or 11, Zach?
I'm on 12. I'm just going to go ahead and double down on the quarterbacks here, despite the fact that you guys have truly incinerated my argument. I'm going to go with Pat Mahomes here just because of Tyreek Hill coming back. I think just given the fact that Kansas City won the Super Bowl last year, they got no signs of slowing down. Pat Mahomes is truly developed into a phenomenal quarterback. Kind of done the right way, right? With kind of prospect building, Andy Reid drafting him, having him sit under Alex Smith for a couple of years. The story is really special, and it's hard to root against guys like that and organizations like that. So I'm gonna go with Pat Mahomes just for the hell of it. I think with Tyreek Hill coming back fully healthy, I think with some of the different receivers that they have, I think Sammy Watkins is kind of taking a larger step forward. Curious to see what they do next year, just given the weapons and whatnot. So what the hell? Pat Mahomes, second quarterback in the first round.
Zach, let me put you on the spot for a second. All right.
Sure.
We're coming up to the end of the first round. You're drafting, right? You have the 11th or 12th pick. Let's say you have the 12th pick. Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes are available. Let's say you take Lamar Jackson, right? Your next pick, your options around that time frame are going to be Julio Jones or I don't know what, maybe Julio Jones, Josh Jacobs, DeAndre Hopkins. You take one of them. You come down to your next pick, your next available running back. Like, let's say you end up taking Julio Jones. Your first running back on your team is going to be
Darius Geis, baby.
Your pick of, I believe it's going to be Le'Veon Bell or Melvin Gordon or Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be your workhorse running back if you end up going quarterback receiver with your first two picks. How would you feel about that in a half PPR league where you need running backs and you need depth at running back position? That is the question.
I mean, I'd kind of like Le'Veon, I'm not going to lie. And I also think
I like too, but
I think the LSU running back is going to be taking the bulk share of the carries, is certainly going to be better than my second round pick Damian Williams last year.
All I'm saying is you lack depth at positions that are very important, whereas quarterback is easier to replace. So that's why.
Well, and what's the take on the RB pool this year? I don't think it's quite as deep, no?
It's actually it's interesting because
at least at the top, like the first few rounds, like you have that tier drop off is pretty big.
You have actually this year the mid rounds are really interesting for running back because you have that combination of James Conner, Le'Veon Bell, and Todd Gurley, guys David Johnson, all going in like the fourth-ish round or like
Leonard Fournette too.
Yeah, late third, early fourth, which is interesting because all those guys obviously have had spectacular seasons in the past, and all of them have potential to bounce back in their own ways. So you're kind of in a more unusual space with running backs because if one of those guys hits, you're getting a top 10 caliber player if they're able to replicate anything close to what they've done in the past. And you could even argue people like Le'Veon, it's not like they lost a major step. It's the fact that they were in a bad offense, right? So and like Todd Gurley, for example, if he's healthy, even with reduced carries, Todd Gurley can finish as a top 15 player in fantasy. So it's an interesting year for running backs. I actually think I'm actually a little bit more scared at the receiver position than I am running backs this year. But even then, I'd lean drafting running backs or prioritizing running backs when you get the opportunity, going best available. But more often than not, best available is running back. So that's the way I look at it. With that being said, Ev, who's your 12?
I did 12. I'm done.
Yeah, you're up.
Mine was Aaron Jones. That was 12. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So my number 12 is Joe Mixon. Touching on what Evan said. Very similar argument. I believe that talent-wise, he's just as good as a lot of other running backs. I think the offense if the offense gets better, then Mixon immediately gets better. That's the way I look at it, right? Like if AJ Green comes back and Joe Burrow immediately adds that boost to the offense that you need, then Joe Mixon's going to kind of have it's almost like what happened to Damian Williams when he was playing with the Chiefs the first time around. Like the moment that offense opened up, regardless of talent level, Damian Williams just all of a sudden was just getting opportunities to just have open space. Mixon hasn't really had those opportunities because AJ Green has been, gone, and Tyler Boyd, as good as he is not really a number one receiver that, demands as much attention as AJ Green would. And then also they haven't had good quarterback play with Dalton just struggling a lot in the last 2 years. If that offense opens up, Joe Mixon all of a sudden gets the opportunities in the run game, and he's talented in the pass game, like Evan said. So Mixon is my 12. Let me ask you guys something really quick, though. What guys just barely missed the cut for you? I'm curious.
For me, Nuke was one. I kind of wanted to slide him in there. I think the fit, I'm actually really excited about it, too. A lot of the points that Zach made, I do think it's going to really work. But I just think there's too much up in the air on how it will work. And I think as much of a mess as the Texans are, and I think, Cy, this is what you mentioned, like they just fed him with the injuries and the other receivers, and Deshaun and him had a really good connection. So as much as I do really like the fit with Arizona, it's hard to match, I think, what he was able to build in Houston. So I just a little too questionable, I think, that I didn't slide him in. But
yeah, what about you, Zach?
Mine was Julio and Aaron Jones, kind of as like at a draw for the 13th position. Probably leaning actually more Aaron after hearing both of y'all's justifications. So those are mine. I do have an interesting question at the end of this. So, Si, I'll let you go, and then I'll ask mine.
I was honestly shocked that you didn't have Julio in your top 12 because I just think Julio is almost a guaranteed top 12 player for me for as long as he's healthy. And so I was shocked to see you. Respect to you, man. You didn't give me that Falcons bias this time around. We didn't have Todd Gurley in the top 12 either. So.
That's right.
I actually had like right around 4 guys that would have all, if you took any of these 4 guys in the first round, I would not be, upset with you, or I would not be like, what are you doing? DeAndre Hopkins being one of them, even if he regresses, could still finish as a top 5 receiver. I don't think he will, but he could. Tyreek Hill is another one. He didn't play a full season last year, but when Tyreek Hill plays a full season with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, like, it's ridiculous. Like, he doesn't need a lot of receptions. He just needs a couple a game, and that's enough for him to have over 100 yards and several touchdowns. So Tyreek Hill. And then at the running, and then one more receiver actually is Chris Godwin. Beast. I don't know what he's going to do with Brady, but if he keeps playing in the slot, I have no reason to believe that he won't be able to keep putting up the numbers. And then Josh Jacobs was a great pick. I think that's one of those guys that a lot of people believe can take that next step to being a perennial top 5 running back for the next several years, because he just has that immense talent and is in an offense that's going to feed him a lot. So all 4 of those guys I think are potential first rounders, right in the Mixon, Aaron Jones range that I had at the 11-12. So that's where I'm at. Sleepers or value picks. I know we said we're going to go into
that. I was going to say that was my question. Like, if you guys could pick 1 or 2 underrated, like I mentioned, best value picks, right? So wherever you're getting them, they're a steal. If you guys have 1 or 2 of those guys, I'd be interested to hear who they are, because there's plenty of them in this draft.
Agreed. Ev, go ahead.
I got to kind of rephrase my analysis because of the question's a little different. Like, we were looking at sleepers. I mean, I kind of made a pretty long list. I kind of came up with a guy at each position, or 2. If you look at quarterback, Aaron Rodgers is really low down there from an ADP perspective. And obviously it's turned into more of a run heavy offense. So I don't really expect that to change, but ADP wise, he's pretty low down there. My sleeper is Sam Darnold. I think Sam Darnold is going to have a really good year. When he got back from mono last year, he was really, really good. The only concern really, the Jets offense in general, but also more the Adam Gase style, which is pretty slow. Running back, I didn't really have anyone that stood up. Wide receiver, I mentioned earlier, Alan Lazard, I think is kind of a sleeper down there. I think he has a good year. He kind of had a little mini breakout last year. And then Gronk at tight end.
Oh shoot!
I don't know. They'll probably update the ADP by the time the drafts roll around. But like, he was outside the top 12 in tight ends, in at least the rankings I was reading, which is just, I get it. He's coming off a retired year, but that's just ridiculous to me.
So let's just say this real quick. Gronk is, in terms of like the rankings, projected outside of it, but when you look at average draft position, he's in the top 12. He's getting picked.
That makes sense.
Top 10. Actually, I think in a lot of situations he get picked as like a top 8 to 7 tight end, which I completely disagree with. I would not pick Gronk anywhere in that range personally, because with that offense, you realize they kept OJ Howard and Cameron Brate, right? Like, it's not like
Cameron Brate doesn't scare me.
You have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rob Gronkowski, Cameron Brate, and OJ Howard. The reason Rob Gronkowski was so damn good on the Patriots is because he was one of the greatest athletes at the tight end position ever, and was getting all the targets because it was just him and Julian Edelman. Now he's older. He's, a year removed from football, going into a new offense. Tom Brady has regressed, and there's 5 guys with targets there. And we haven't even mentioned other receivers. How can I honestly project Gronk to be better than, like, Gronk is going in the same range as people like Noah Fant. Why would I draft Rob Gronkowski when I can take the bet on somebody like a Noah Fant who clearly is going to be
no question. No.
That's the bias.
Right, I'm with you on this one.
So you
that's
made
the bias of old players versus new ones. Okay,
he's
that out there.
Okay, he's a year older, but he didn't play last year, so he's finally fresh, completely healthy. He's in great shape, as we've known. And yes, there are a ton of weapons there, but there's only one of them that's played with Brady before, and Brady's going to feed him the ball.
How many targets do you think Rob gets next year?
I think he gets, I don't know a full season number. I don't even know what that would be. I don't have that kind of number in my head. But I think he gets a big target share. Now, I do agree tight end is actually pretty deep this year. So maybe in last year's draft, I think it would have gone a lot higher. But there actually are quite a few tight ends I like. But I don't know, man. I would find it hard pressed to take him outside of certainly the top 8. Certainly the top 8, if not higher.
That is, I don't know. I'm just saying, like, some part of me feels like with the tight end position, people rely too much on names of the past as opposed to looking towards the future, because every year you see new guys step up. Mark Andrews was taken outside of the top 10 last year with, bigger known names being taken in front of him. Mark Andrews ended up being a top 3 tight end. What you have to look for with the tight end position for me personally is, where do you see more target share and more receptions coming in an offense with the athleticism factored in? The reason Mark Andrews was such a viable pick last year is because everyone saw the athleticism and they saw a clear path for targets last year. The reason I argued that I would take a guy like Noah Fant over Gronk is because Noah Fant is going to be the number 2, number 3 option in that offense. He's the only tight end on that offense that's going to get receptions. And if you compare Noah Fant's rookie year, your perfect comparison is George Kittle. George Kittle and Noah Fant had identical rookie seasons. Why would I not believe that Noah Fant isn't capable of taking a step up when he came out of college as an even better prospect? Those are the kinds of things I try to think about at tight end, because Gronk he has such a low ceiling. Like, I'm sorry, there's no way a Gronk coming a year off of the situation that he was in, a year not playing, coming back. Is he like 30 now at the tight end position? And then he's playing with literally 4 other guys in a new system for Brady with Bruce Arians. How can you honestly tell me he's going to get targets? You have to project out targets. And when you look at it that way, if Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are both getting over 100 targets, which they're definitely going to get over 100 targets, how many viable targets do you think Rob Gronkowski as an older guy is going to get? I bet Rob becomes one of those like red zone, once every, or maybe plays like half the snaps kinds of guy by the end of the season. Like, I'm putting it out there right now. I would not take him that high. I would take people with more potential and more target share. That's the big thing with receivers in fantasy.
We're talking about the best tight end of all time, Cy. This guy is an utter freak of nature. And speaking of which, you listed, 30 years old? Tony Gonzalez played till he was like 107. Like, this guy was still productive on Atlanta. And also, you mentioned Noah Fant as an example. Well, one thing I do know is that you have the best quarterback in the history of the game throwing to Gronk. And you have Drew Lock, who is the furthest thing from a lock, throwing to Noah Fant. I don't buy that for anything. I'm going with Gronk regardless of what his projected target share is.
Let me ask you something. You said, you have arguably the greatest quarterback of all time. You're right. Tom Brady. What did Tom Brady do last year in terms of fantasy production?
He didn't.
It's going to be a hell of a lot better this year.
Year, but he's going to certainly have a better year. Okay, and he has a historical track record of throwing down the middle of the field. Just saying. Okay.
Here's the other point.
To Gronk.
Here's the other point. If you watched Patriots football last year, if you watched Tom Brady, he regressed. He's going into a new offense. Again,
QB12.
Gronk, QB12. Come on, man. He finished on the worst team in our league last year, basically, if you project out the top 12 quarterback. He was
with no weapons, though. Now he has this. I mean, he's got to be a top 10.
Even with his weapons, even if he moves in the top 10, that's still not enough for me to think he has enough to throw the ball down the field enough times a game for all of those guys to get production.
Jameis was QB3.
In order for Gronk to finish as the top, yeah, but it makes
Jameis is making like $500,000 this year.
Dude, but the point is Jameis Winston can air the ball out. Jameis Winston, even though he throws a ton of picks, is a great person for you to have when it comes to receivers in fantasy, because that man is not afraid to throw the ball 50 yards down the field, and if you have good receivers, they'll catch him. Tom Brady can barely throw a ball 50 yards down the field now if you watch the way he plays. He's been playing dink and dunk for the last season or two, even when they beat the Rams in the Super Bowl. Anyway, I digress because we'll have plenty of time to talk about Gronk.
Dunk to Gronk.
I want to throw my 2 sleepers out there. One of them is a sleeper. One of them is a value. I will say he is a sleeper right now for where he's going, but I'm worried that as drafts happen, he's going to move up the board more. And at that point, he will no longer be a sleeper to me. But I love Miles Sanders if you're getting him at the end of the second, early third round, because Miles Sanders has the potential to be the number 3 or 4 player in fantasy football, given what he brings to the table in terms of his overall talent. He is an incredible receiver, incredible running back, and is in a great offense. If Carson Wentz is healthy and has Doug Peterson as his offensive coordinator, if he gets the workload that he deserves, Miles Sanders could very easily win you a league where he's being drafted. My only concern is I think a lot of people are going to understand that and start drafting him towards the end of the first round, beginning second round, and at that point he loses his value. Here's another guy whose name is not going to be unfamiliar to you guys, but is somebody that is getting drafted really low. Brandon Cooks. I am very surprised with his value right now because Brandon Cooks is currently going, I think, in like the 7th or later, something in that time frame of rounds. He just went to Houston with Deshaun Watson, who is a very good quarterback that can throw the ball down the field. There are no other receiving options there with the exception of Will Fuller, who's hurt for 90% of the games every season that he plays. And now they have David Johnson, who also gets hurt. Brandon Cooks is going to get the most targets that he's ever gotten in his career. He is not old. He was just hurt last year. But all of a sudden, he's going in the 7th round, and he could very easily finish as an upscale wide receiver, too, and you can get him for a true value at where he's going. So those are the 2 guys I've noticed in drafts that I really like at the particular spots they're going at.
Nice. Just piggybacking that off that side, I would say I have 1 value and 1 sleeper as well. My sleeper, depending on where he is right now, let's just say like early 3rd round, late 2nd, is Austin Eckler, especially in a half PPR league. Him fully getting the keys to the system, I think, was well deserved, well earned. And I think, with the new quarterback, kind of like the back and forth, is Tyrod going to start, and then is he going to hand the keys to Justin Herbert? Whatever it is, they're going to need a check down, and Austin Eckler is a proven track record of successful in those environments. So I think in terms of like late 2nd, early 3rd, I would consider him quite a sleeper. I'm not sure where his ADP is currently at the moment, but I will say for the value pick, I've gotten him the last 2-3 years. He has not once let me down. If you can sneak in the late 4th and get Kenny Golladay, you will not be disappointed, especially with Matt Stafford coming back. He's an absolute gunslinger. And they're going to, knowing Detroit, they're going to have to throw the ball more often than not because they're going to be down in the game probably after like the first 5 minutes in the first quarter. And I think Kenny Golladay is he puts up numbers every year. So that's my value pick for late.
You may want to recheck the rankings.
You don't want to check the board because you said Kenny Golladay in the 4th round. You got the steal of the draft because Kenny Golladay is getting drafted at the end of the 2nd round as his ADP.
Even higher.
Seriously?
I see 17.
Wow.
Yeah, there's some leagues where he's going like mid 2nd round.
I got Chris Godwin in the 4th last year, and then I got Golladay in the 5th last year.
Yeah, that's
insane.
Both of those guys will be gone by the mid to end of the 2nd round because they've already proven their value. So they just won't be values this year because they're going to get drafted higher. Though the hope is to find those kinds of players again in the 3rd or 4th round. So that's interesting. Let me ask you one last thing before we sign off here. Eckler is a really interesting conversation for me because I think he is somebody that last year with the opportunities that he had truly had the ability to be a top back almost every single week in fantasy. The question and the concerns that I have is there's no longer a Phillip Rivers offense there. Melvin Gordon's gone. They're losing a lot of what their foundation was in terms of what made Eckler successful, right? Because it wasn't his rushing as much as it was his receiving. So do you worry at all about this new offense? You don't know if it's going to be Tyrod Taylor. You don't know when Herbert's going to come in. You don't know how the wheels are going to turn in that offense. Do you worry at all about Eckler not being able to adjust to that as easily as we might think and being, not a shell, but less than what he was last year? That's the concern that I have with how high Eckler is going. It's almost like high risk, high reward to me. He has the potential to be this so great, but his floor is also now much lower given all the variables that have changed in that offense, is my opinion. Yeah.
That's a good point. E, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair where Eckler's going, given a lot of things Sai said. He did so well with it last year, which was kind of a surprise to me. I'm not sold he can do that again. I don't know. I think it's pretty fair where he's going. But the upside's there, as he proved last year. So
I also think Phil Rivers is one of the best quarterbacks for running back fantasy value because he loves giving them the football.
He got a lot in the air.
His whole career, he's had the top running backs in fantasy there, no matter how good or bad they have been, So
yeah. And just to jump in, I actually remembered my running back kind of value sleeper, whatever you want to call it, Raheem Mostert. He's going pretty deep down there. And obviously you still have Tevin Coleman there. They don't have Breida anymore, though. And there is more than enough volume at the running back position in that offense for 2 guys to be successful. And obviously he wasn't a big name by any means, which is probably why he's so much further down. But the dude was going off throughout the playoffs, and he was clearly the top back. And obviously Coleman was hurt, so that helped. And who knows? But again, I think they both could have good years. So
I feel bad for him if he doesn't get the majority of the carries. To be honest, based on how damn good he was, I think he had 5.6 yards per carry.
It was
last
crazy.
Season. He was
yeah.
crazy. It felt like every time he touched the ball, he was running for like 8 yards, even though it was like 5.6 yards per carry. I'm going to feel really bad for him if he doesn't get the bulk of the carries. But like you said, Evan, in a Kyle Shanahan offense, even if they split like, 200 to 100, or if they both end up getting 200 carries a pop, they both could still finish as RB2s. But I think if Mostert ends up taking over as a lead back, dude, his ceiling is as high as the sky. Like, he is so freaking good. And Shanahan, you could put me behind that offensive Shanahan for the football.
Yeah,
and I'm
exactly.
yards. Like, that's how freaking good that offense is. So yeah, that's a really good point, Evan.
Well, guys, I think given the fact that we're nearing the 2-hour marker here, if the audience couldn't tell, we have a tendency of liking our football, and certainly excited for it to come back in the fall here, crossing our fingers. But we should probably close this one out. I'm not sure if you guys had anything final to say, but before we go ahead and wrap this thing up.
Yeah, I'll just throw out the fact that this won't be the last time we talk fantasy football. And we'll talk fantasy football plenty, and that's probably why we moved it to Mondays too, so we could do more football analysis in the future. So thank you all as always for tuning in. And, I'm sorry to keep it late. Ev, go ahead. What you got?
No, yeah, I did actually want to mention one kind of thing. Just wanted to shout out NASCAR, what they've been doing. I wanted to mention this on last week's pod, but they've done a lot of really great things in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, banning Confederate flags, and then obviously with this horrible situation around Bubba Wallace. A pretty cool moment earlier today at Talladega. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But I just wanted to shout out what they've been doing to support that movement. Wanted to mention it last week, but even more pertinent now. So
major props to NASCAR. Shout out to I think Zach and I both want to give a shout out to the NASCAR racer whose name I can't even remember, that decided to take himself out of NASCAR because they wouldn't allow Confederate flags. Congratulations on your 0 wins, buddy. Thank you for exiting the sport, because we don't need people like you representing professional sports. So shout out to you for leaving. We're happy to see you go. With that being said, that was Mondays Down South.
Peace.